far enough into the new Ken Burns documentary on the American Revolution, about 4 episodes out of 6, that I think I can give you my take so far. Ken Burns is beloved in a lot of circles. I'm pretty neutral about him. I think he's a great storyteller, but his Civil War documentary relies pretty heavily on the lost cause narrative and not heavily enough on historians, so, you know. But I actually think he corrects that a good bit in the American Revolution documentary. It is historian heavy. It actually has some of my favorite historians. I really love Annette Gordon-Reed. She's in the documentary. She wrote The Hemmingses of Monticello and really cemented in the popular mind that Thomas Jefferson had sexually assaulted Sally Hemings. Maggie Blackhawk is great. She's an Ojibwe legal scholar at NYU. Vincent Brown is a great historian of the slave trade at Harvard. And that's just a handful. Of course, there are tons of others. And I appreciate that he even brings in historians from the British perspective. The documentary is pissing a lot of people off, especially on the right. I've gotten a lot of this. Ken Burns is a mouthpiece for the anti-Trump left. The documentary is too woke. And I've also gotten a lot of pushback from the left that the documentary is not woke enough. I've even seen some comparisons of Ken Burns to Nazi propagandists, which I think is too far. I think that the documentary is ahead of the general population of America as far as their understanding of American history. Most Americans get a very whitewashed, mythologized version of the American Revolution, and this documentary really pushes back on that. The documentary depends a lot more on the historians I was talking about before, so you're getting a much broader perspective of the influence of the indigenous population that was already here. The majority of the people who lived here when the revolution broke out were indigenous, and of course the experience of the Black people who lived here. I don't think the documentary really lionizes the founders. It presents them as troubled, flawed, sometimes kind of mediocre, especially George Washington. It doesn't go hard enough on them, in my opinion, but I go a lot harder than most people. Cool. So it's ahead of Gen Pop in that regard. It is behind academia. Stories of women and people of color in American history started becoming accepted in academia in like the 60s and 70s. Post-World War II and post the Civil Rights Movement, a lot more space was made in universities for minorities and women to get PhDs in these topics. And of course, they get into the studies and are like, why is no one talking about the stories of people who are like me? And so they started doing that. It's like the new social movement in history. So for it to be 2025 and people to be like revolutionized by the idea that women existed in America in 1776 is kind of, you know, like, okay, not terribly woke, right? Just obvious common sense. Criticism of it is not, it says the founders were infallible. It does not do that. My criticism is that it says America is more important than it is. Burns went on Theo Von and said that the American Revolution was the most important historical event since the birth of Christ. That's ridiculous. The documentary claims that the American Revolution set off the movement of people rebelling against colonial powers. That's ridiculous. Indigenous people had been rebelling against colonial powers for literal decades. To me, the way that the documentary is woke is like bars on the floor. It's just reality. The ways that it frames American exceptionalism is kind of silly. I think it's valuable for the general population of America.